What if events went differently in the Amazing Spider-Man universe? What if the Amazing Spider-Man had lost his Aunt May? What if the events of TASM had changed? What if Uncle Ben was not killed in this universe? What if it was somebody else? If Aunt May would have died, do you think this would have been a small change within the Amazing Spider-Man timeline? Or do you think it would have been a big change for Peter Parker? Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, to another Marvel's What If. This time, we're going to be diving deep into Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man franchise. We're going to be changing one little thing to see what would have happened. That being said, I do want to say, make sure to follow my Instagram, as right now I'm going to be doing a ton of community shoutouts. You might have already seen me do this right now, where I'm taking a lot of your requests and making them into reels. I also do want to say, if you want to skip the line and you want to see your fan fiction made on this YouTube channel, do make sure to check out the Patreon, as I have tiers that are starting at just $1 a month. But that being said, I do want to get into this Marvel's What If. It's been a long time coming. So that being said, let's dive into the multiverse. Peter Parker was a normal high school kid. He lived with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who were his guardians. He was a pretty smart kid but introverted guy, which often got him bullied by Flash Thompson, a schoolmate. One day, Flash was having fun bullying a young student, and Peter stood up to him. A fight between Flash and Peter ensued. Well, more of a beating, really, for Peter was on the receiving end of Flash's blows. That episode did have a silver lining, though. Gwen Stacy finally noticed him. Gwen Stacy was the secret crush of Peter Parker, and she got all more attractive when she berated Flash for bullying others. She also praised Peter for his bravery. At home, Uncle Ben gave Peter a briefcase, which belonged to Peter's father. Peter remembered that his parents had suddenly fled from their home one night while he was a little kid, and left him in the care of Uncle Ben and Aunt May. With these documents from the briefcase, Peter found out that his dad, the renowned Richard Parker, worked at Oscorp as a scientist in the field of cross-species genetics. His dad worked with a man named Dr. Kirk Connors. Peter, who had always been curious about what befell of his parents, he looked up their deaths on the internet and found out the plane crash that killed them. Peter was intrigued by the work his father did, and his death resolved into talking to Dr. Connors for more information. Peter snuck into Oscorp's building, blending in with a group of people. He didn't go far before he was discovered by Miss Stacy, who just happened to be working there. Yeah, he did not see that coming. Gwen did warn him to leave, but she didn't expose him to the security guards. After Peter got away from Gwen's scrutiny, he wandered and he found himself in a very impressive lab. In the lab, genetically modified radioactive spiders were developing a biocable. Peter marveled at what he saw. The spiders didn't seem to be ones that would easily blend into a natural inhabitant. Then it happened. It was a regular boring day at the control room. Poring over dozens of surveillance cameras, looking for anything out of the ordinary, was monumentous work and definitely got boring over time. Today, however, was going to be different for Peter Clinton, the head of security for Oscorp, while absent-mindedly eating popcorn and craving his PlayStation. He spotted a figure that was wearing a lab coat inside of one of the restricted research areas. And to make matters worse, it looked like a lot of activity was happening around the individual. The next thing he did was more of a reflex action than one of free. He picked up his walkie-talkie, barked instructions into it, and hit the alarm. Things really had not gone as Peter hoped. He came to Oscorp to meet Dr. Connors and talk to him, but here he was, brushing off these weird spiders as they rained on him. To make matters worse, an alarm had gone off and was blaring overhead. So much for sneaking out, Peter thought. Then Peter felt a really nasty sting on the back of his neck. He was almost certain one of the spiders got in, and it did indeed. Before he could get his hands to his neck to swat off the offending insect, the doors to the lab burst open, and the security guards were wielding batons around him, pinning his hands behind him and dragging him out of the laboratory. Peter sat in the subway train and mulled over what had happened. After he had been thrown out of the building by Oscorp guards, he had tried pleading with them to let him see Dr. Connors. He was, however, warned not to visit Oscorp, or the police will be called. His neck was still sore from the spider's sting. Peter saw from the corner of his eye a man who clearly spelled trouble. As the man moved to shove Peter, Peter's reflexes kicked in and he punched the man who flew to the other end of the train. He was taken aback at how he was able to do that, but not for long, for he saw as more men stood up in the train and were coming towards him. Peter begged the gang to stay away, but they still approached. In no time, Parker made short work of them. With his incredible agility and strength, he delivered blows and punches that knocked the men out. At home, Peter saw the offending spider hidden in his jacket, and he stored it away. He looked up on the internet the abilities of spiders and discovered that he had them. Apparently, the genetically modified spider had given him spider-like abilities. He now had super strength, sharp senses, reflexes, increased agility, and speed. Peter stood on the doorstep of the home of Dr. Connors the next day. This time, he didn't just want to talk about his father, but about his new superpowers. After giving Dr. Connors his father's documents, Peter listened as Dr. Connors told him about the research he and Richard Parker had been doing. Connors explained that he and Richard were researching cross-species genetics in order to find a way to regrow lost limbs. His inspiration stems from the fact that he does not have a right arm. Connors went on to say that since the research is slow, he has been consistently pressed by his supervisors, Dr. Ratha, to devise a cure for Oscorp's CEO, Norman Osborn, who is terminally ill. Connors admitted that the pressure was frustrating. Connors revealed that the serum which is being created is called the Lizard Serum. In school, Flash Thompson and the rest of the basketball team were playing, and then Flash decided to have more fun by bullying another student. Parker then decided time was right to test his new abilities on Flash. When the ball got into Peter's possession, Flash demanded him to give it back, and Peter, he just shook his head no. He used the ball and made fun of Flash in front of his teammates, who were enjoying the show. Then he ran with the ball towards the backboard, poised to dunk the ball into the hoop. But Peter Parker sat with Uncle Ben in the principal's office and listened as they discussed his offense and handed down his punishment. He had apparently underestimated his new strengths, for he had slammed the ball too hard into the glass backboard, effectively breaking it into pieces. Peter's transgression was rewarded with community service, and he and Uncle Ben left the office. Outside the office and in the hallway, Uncle Ben berated Peter for his actions and told him not to go around enacting revenge to bullies. Ben then informed Peter that because he had come to the school, he changed shifts at work, so Peter would have to be the one to pick up Aunt May from work by 9 p.m. Peter agreed, and Ben left. Peter instead had other plans. He practiced his newfound powers in a desert junkyard and then went to Oscorp to meet with Dr. Connors. Dr. Connors showed him how the regeneration formula worked on a laboratory mouse. With Peter's help, Dr. Connors got the formula right, and the mouse regrew its lost limb. As Peter walked up to the steps to the house, he saw Uncle Ben sitting on the chair waiting for him. He suddenly remembered that he was supposed to pick up Aunt May from work. He began apologizing, but he brushed him off and ordered him to apologize to Aunt May instead. After he said sorry to Aunt May, Uncle Ben launched into a diatribe against him and scolded him for not picking up his aunt. Peter responded in like manner, and an argument ensued. Parker then walked out of the house, leaving Aunt May and Uncle Ben stunned. Ben tried to go after Peter, but May stopped him, saying that Peter wouldn't listen to him, and she should go instead. Peter was walking in the store to buy some milk, but he was 2 cents short of the selling price, so the storekeeper refused to sell it to him. As he was leaving, he witnessed a man wearing sunshades rob the cash register, but he let the thief go free, even after the storekeeper begged him to stop the thief. Aunt May walked on the sidewalk, wondering where Peter had gone, and hoping to see him. She saw a man wearing sunshades running frantically towards her, and shoving people on the street. Then she heard a man calling for people to stop the thief. Then, it's as if time had slowed down. The man in the dark sunshades tripped and fell, a gun, leaving his grip and clattering to a stop, a few feet from his reach. Aunt May didn't have time to act. She ran towards the gun, but the thief got it first, and both of them struggled to hold the gun. But he was too powerful for her, and he turned the gun over and shot her in the head at point-blank range. Peter heard the gunshot, and it was surprisingly close. He got up and down the street, and his eyes settled on the immobilized person lying on the sidewalk across the street. He walked over to the person and found that it was his Aunt May. She was shot in the head with a scared look on her face and very much dead. With tears in his eyes, he called for an ambulance, and he put his hands around Aunt May's head. Peter repeatedly called Aunt May by name. She was gone. The policeman showed Uncle Ben the sketch of the suspect, asking him if he could recognize the man. Ben shook his head as an answer. The man was heartbroken and sobbing silently. The policeman then left after giving Peter the sketch, which he requested. The officer also told him that the shooter had a tattoo of a star on his left wrist. Peter then sat at the table beside Uncle Ben, and Ben began blaming himself for Aunt May's death, saying that his anger caused her to leave the house and go after Peter. He sobbed and wished he had controlled his anger. Peter, in tears, also blamed himself for May's death. He said that he had a chance to stop the killer, but he didn't, and his bad attitude cost him May's life. After crying together for the next 15 minutes, Peter apologized to Uncle Ben, and the latter also apologized to Peter. Uncle said that he forgave Peter for his actions, and that Aunt May would have wanted him to do so. Peter was distraught by Aunt May's death, and he couldn't be counseled. Flash tried sympathizing with Parker at school. Gwen tried too, and he brushed her off. He then began hunting for criminals matching the description of the guy in the sketch and leaving them for the police to arrest. With the numerous arrests of criminals and reports of a masked guy around the city who publicly called himself Spider-Man, the police became interested in apprehending him. The police, led by Gwen's father, Captain George Stacy, began a citywide manhunt to catch him. They believed that even as he was fighting criminals, he was breaking multiple laws in the process and must be brought to justice. A wanted poster sign was posted around the city for any information that might lead to the capture of Spider-Man. One night, after Peter had caught a car thief and immobilized him for the police to find, he was being chased by the police in a high-speed pursuit. He quickly evaded by swinging his way around the city. At home, Uncle Ben waited up for Peter to arrive. When Peter came in, the two got into a heated argument, and Uncle Ben made Peter remove his hoodie. With the hoodie off, Uncle Ben saw the bruises on Peter's face from where the car thief punched him. A worried Uncle Ben begged Peter to tell him the truth of what had happened, and Peter told him about the genetically modified spiders, Oscorp, and then his newfound abilities. Uncle Ben didn't believe it, so Peter crawled up the wall, then onto the ceiling and came down. He told Ben that he had abilities like a spider, but it also came with extra perks, like super strength. Ben didn't like the idea of Peter using his powers as a vigilante, and urged him to leave law enforcement for the police. In Oscorp, Dr. Connors was being pressured by Dr. Ratha to begin human trials using the serum. Seeing as the tests on laboratory mice had proven successful, Dr. Connors stood his ground and refused to start human trials. Because the serum was not modified enough to be used on humans, Ratha fired him on the spot and took samples of the serum so he could administer it at a Veterans Administration hospital under the guidance of flu shots. In desperation, Connors injected himself with the serum and later passed out due to the effects of the drug. When he came back to consciousness, he found out that his arm had regrown, but something else was happening. The arm was too big and it wasn't a normal human arm. Plus, the arm had started developing scales like that of a reptile. He suddenly remembered that Ratha had been on his way to the Veterans Hospital to administer the drug to others. He had to stop him, so he left his office. Peter was in the home of Gwen Stacy. She had invited him over for dinner. At dinner, Peter and Captain Stacy got into a heated argument about the justification of Spider-Man, and if he was in fact doing the city a service or disservice. Gwen got upset and left the table with Peter. On the roof of the building, Peter told her about his super abilities and kissed her. Captain Stacy received an emergency call and he left the house. Peter, hearing sounds coming from the other side of the city, also left to see what was going on. On the bridge, Peter saw what looked like a huge giant lizard, which was throwing cars off the bridge in a rampage. Peter caught the cars and dangled them on the side of the bridge, using his bio cable webs. A father asked him to save his son, who was trapped in one of the cars. Peter removed his mask and gave the boy it, which gave him courage to climb out of the car. That decision is one that Peter later regretted, for after the lizard and Spider-Man left the scene, the police came and questioned the boy. They also got a sketch of Spider-Man from the kid. After glancing at the rough sketch, Captain Stacy saw the guy in the sketch looked like Peter Parker, his daughter's new girlfriend. He also remembered that Peter was very defensive of Spider-Man while at dinner. The pieces fit perfectly. When Peter got home that night, Uncle Ben berated Peter for getting involved in the bridge saga and told him that they should come clean to Captain Stacy. Uncle Ben then proceeded to call Captain Stacy and invited him to their house. When Stacy arrived, he was not particularly shocked because he had already found out through the little boy's sketch. Captain Stacy removed a pair of handcuffs from his pocket with the intention of arresting Peter, but he hesitated and seemed to think better of the arrest. He proposed to Peter if he could instead work with the police department to apprehend criminals and this lizard that was on the loose. After all, this thing looked not to be human, so Peter's superhuman powers could come in handy, and it could save a lot of lives. Uncle Ben was not really thrilled by this arrangement, but Captain Stacy said that the alternative was being arrested by the police and tried for dozens of misdemeanors. At this, Ben asked Peter if he would be willing to help the police, and he agreed. Peter went to Oscorp to ask Dr. Connors how a reptile can be captured and subdued. Connors, suspicious of Peter's motives, did not give him any helpful information. Peter then saw that Dr. Connors had scales on his neck. After Dr. Connors left, Peter looked around the lab area and saw that a glass cube, which held a lab mouse, was broken. On further inspection, he found the lab mouse now mutated as a reptile with scales, and it was eating another mouse. In horror, Peter ran to the police department and told Captain Stacy that Dr. Connors was the giant reptile. Stacy did not believe him, but agreed to look into the scientist. Peter found the lair of the reptilian monster in the city sewers, and trying to get photographs of it. A fight ensued, and Dr. Connors, now the lizard, saw that the camera belonged to Peter Parker. That's how he knew that Peter was Spider-Man. It would have been a normal day at school for Parker and the rest of the students, but the reptilian monster showed up. The monster tried getting Peter to be on his side, saying that he planned to save humanity by curing them of their biological shortcomings. Peter was not taking it in by this offer, and a great fight ensued. After the lizard had left, Peter went into the sewers and found Dr. Connors' work area. He inspected the place and found out that the lizard planned to decimate the serum all over Manhattan to mutate the humans by using a cloud-generating device at Oscorp. He then called Gwen and asked her to access Oscorp's files on the regenerating serum and come up with an anti-serum as soon as possible. He then called Captain Stacy and told him of what the lizard was planning to do. Uncle Ben was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper, when suddenly the walls were thrown in. Before he had time to react, a green gas enveloped him, and he began mutating into a giant lizard. The police mobilized and came to Uncle Ben's home. They attacked the duo with M15 rifles, and they were subdued, but only for a moment, for the regenerative powers of the reptilians healed them, and they turned on the cops, releasing the gas on them, turning them into reptiles. The police now had to deal with more reptilians, ravaging the city, and they were swarming in. Peter showed up and informed Stacy that Gwen was at Oscorp working on an antidote for the serum, and she would need some help. Stacy in turn broke the news that Uncle Ben had been mutated by Dr. Connors and was one of the monsters that the police were trying hard to subdue. After that, Captain Stacy left for Oscorp. Peter then climbed to the top of a building and looked down onto the scene. It was an apocalypse, and Dr. Connors was planning to spread it. The police were already losing this fight and would need a lot of help. Parker saw Dr. Connors heading to Oscorp and got one of the policemen to radio that information to Captain Stacy, who was also en route to the tower. Parker then decided that protecting Gwen and the antidote was more important than helping the embattled police units. As he was swinging away, he was mistakenly shot by one of the police officers, and the bullet deeply grazed his thigh. He wasn't able to swing properly. The engineer sat in front of the TV and heard the announcer say that Spider-Man, who was en route to the Oscorp Tower, was injured and would make it. The man, who was the father of the boy Peter saved on the bridge, marshaled all crane operators in the area to maneuver their cranes 90-degree angles over the streets leading to Oscorp so that Spider-Man could easily swing his way to the tower. Peter swung his way to the tower and saw the lizard on the roof, ready to attach the cloud-generating device. Peter then climbed to the roof and began fighting with the lizard. Down on the streets, Captain Stacy arrived at Oscorp and found Gwen holding the antidote. She gave him the canister containing the antidote and told him to get to Peter and give it to him. On the roof of Oscorp, the lizard overpowered Peter and disabled the bio-cable web device on his wrists. As he was about to kill Parker, Captain Stacy showed up and shot liquid nitrogen tanks, which were on the roof. Peter then snagged up one of the hoses and sprayed the lizard with the nitrogen. As the nitrogen began to solidify on the lizard, Captain Stacy shot it multiple times and overpowered it. In the brief moment, Stacy gave Peter the antidote canister, saying that it was a gift from Gwen. Peter then began climbing to reach the cloud-generating device. The lizard then began regenerating its lost limbs and then attacked Stacy, stabbing him with his sharp claws. Then he turned and began chasing Parker. At the last moment, Spider-Man exchanged the lizard's serum with the antidote, and then the device spread the antidote all over the city. Then Peter and Dr. Connors, who was changing back to his normal self, came down from the tower. A weak Dr. Connors told Peter to check on Captain Stacy. Peter saw that Captain Stacy was bleeding, and he grabbed his police radio and radioed in the helicopter, and that it should come to Oscorp Tower. When the chopper arrived, Captain Stacy was put on board and flown to a hospital. The next day, Peter went to the hospital to see Gwen and also get his thighs stitched. He inquired from Gwen about her father, and she said that he was on the road to recovery. Peter breathed a sign of relief. Those stab wounds really looked bad, and he feared for Captain Stacy's life. Thankfully, he's gonna get better. Gwen asked about Peter's uncle, and he responded that the antidote had worked well with his uncle, and he was feeling well at home and very much human. Gwen told Peter that the White House had called in and congratulated her father for the great work they did in stopping the reptilian apocalypse. She went on to say that the president offered her father, her, and Spider-Man, and the other officers presidential medals, but the White House invitations would come after they were fully recovered. Peter then jokingly asked Gwen if he should attend the ceremony dressed and masked as Spider-Man. She responded by saying if that part was even under debate. And that is going to be, what if Aunt May had been killed in The Amazing Spider-Man? What if Peter Parker's Aunt May died in The Amazing Spider-Man rather than Uncle Ben? It definitely would have been interesting to see these alternate events take place because Spider-Man is working with the police, and it's a very interesting take. Although I don't think I would make him Spider-Cop, I think Peter would somehow work with the police, but he would also do his own things. But I think it's a very interesting concept. It's kind of like Jim Gordon working with Batman, and it's kind of like Captain Stacy working with with Spider-Man. So I really hope that you enjoyed this Marvel's What If. It was a very gruesome what if, Aunt May getting shot point blank in the face. It was something that would have horrified Peter Parker. But again, that's it for this Marvel's What If. If you like what you see on the channel, make sure to support the Patreon as it's starting at just $1. And also, if you want some community shoutouts and you want those requests made, do make sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere else. I also have a Discord and Reddit page where you can post a lot of your fan theories and even more requests. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace out.